I went on a girls' night out against his wishes, so he took everything and vanished. If someone ever told me that a night of fun with friends will be the end of my marriage and make me lose everything I had, that I will begin to doubt all my decisions, I wouldn't believe them. But now, in the lonely house where I live after my husband has left and my life is in shambles, I cannot even find in me the ability to laugh at this irony. My name is Amanda, and my husband Matt used to be my everything. When we first met, I felt like I had won the jackpot. He was kind, patient, and dependable, the kind of man you could rely on no matter what. I was drawn to his steady presence, especially because I've always been a little more impulsive, the live in the moment kind of person. Matt balanced me out in a way that made me feel safe, like no matter how chaotic life got, we'd figure it out together. We first saw each other during a dinner party, and we were introduced by common friends. He was watching all from the corner of the room, standing still, and I recall the mild awkwardness in his personality, which set him apart from others. When I was freely talking with everybody, smiling and switching between the groups, this one at most only answered questions that people asked him. Part of me found something about that to be interesting. I walked up to him and we began a conversation. I think of the time when he would listen to me and actually seem to care about what I wanted to say. Towards the end of the night, he tried to capture my digits, and the rest is history. From the beginning, we clicked in a way I hadn't experienced before. We had different personalities, but somehow they worked together. I loved how he always had a plan for everything, while I brought spontaneity and excitement to his life. We'd spend hours talking about our dreams, to own a house, save for the future, and create a stable environment where we could eventually raise a family. Mine? I just wanted to enjoy the moment, travel, and experience as much as I could. At the time, those differences felt like strengths. We weren't the same, but we complemented each other. I really felt that when Matt proposed, it was something that I would have been wanting to move on to the next level. We had been in a relationship for 3 years, and although he didn't believe in marriage at first sight, I convinced him that we were ready for it. I shared with him how much we cared for each other and how we created the future he wanted. Besides, he eventually agreed, yet there was always a nagging thought deep inside me that I was forcing him to get to the point. Yet when we got married, everything fitted and felt almost right. It was like a dream up to the first year. We were happy, we were efficient, and I really thought the world of us and felt that there was nothing we couldn't conquer. But as time went on, cracks started to form. Matt was the kind of man who liked to plan every detail of his life, especially when it came to finances. He wanted to save for a down payment on a house, avoid unnecessary expenses, and set us up for the future. At first, I admired him. It showed how much he cared about providing for us and ensuring we had a solid foundation. But as the months passed, his carefulness started to feel like control. For as long as I can remember, I have genuinely liked pampering myself occasionally and buying myself little things, such as dresses, weekends to go, and have fun with friends or going out for fine dinner. To me, those moments made life fun and exciting, but Matt would still remind me how the money could otherwise be used for what we considered important in the life of a couple. He wasn't mean about it. He would tell me the reasons I was hearing rather slowly, almost to the point that it seemed like he was tired, but I felt like I was being taught. It made me feel like I could not live the life that we were living because our eyes were always on a future that might never come. I know now that his concerns came from a good place, but at the time, it felt suffocating. I began to resent the way he'd comment on my spending or remind me of our savings goals. It wasn't like I was draining our account or putting us in debt, but every conversation about money felt like a personal attack. I started avoiding the topic altogether, brushing off his suggestions or changing the subject whenever it came up. On the other hand, I realized I annoyed Matt too with my actions and reactions, words and deeds. He once said that he thought I was not being serious about our future, that I was too much of a realist for my own good and didn't pay enough attention to what might come next. For a moment, I did not know how to answer him because in some ways, I knew he was right. But instead of realizing that, I had to turn defensive about it. I said to him words to the effect of, "You are too muscular, you overdo the control thing." Those arguments were rare, but they made me and him feel like we were not being listened to and appreciated. Looking back, Those small disagreements were the first signs of the distance that would eventually grow between us. At the time, I didn't realize how much they mattered. I thought they were just normal bumps in the road, things we'd work through like any couple, but they weren't just bumps. They were the start of something much bigger. It started with a simple text from my closest friend, Chloe. We should go out for a girls' night out since we have not done so for a very long time. We need to do this. Let's make it happen this weekend. At first, I ignored it. For the past few days, Matt has been rather quiet, and I could see something bothering him. He said that he had a huge business trip the following weekend, and how much it meant to him in his profession, but I believe there was more to it than that. He just looked absent-minded. A few days before he left, we had yet another conversation about money, or rather, he talked, and I listened with a growing sense of frustration. It wasn't anything new. He mentioned the rising cost of living, his goal of saving for a house, and how every unnecessary expense set us back. This time, it was about a dress I had bought online for an event we hadn't even confirmed attending. He wasn't angry, just disappointed. Calm as ever, he explained how we needed to prioritize our goals. I automatically sensed that I was receiving a scolding for craving something good. I did not consider it as a major issue. We were not poor and all that, were we? But the words he said to me made me feel as though I wasn't being present enough, smart enough, pretty enough, loving enough, intelligent enough for him anymore, as though the woman he married was not sufficient for him at all. I tried to dismiss it and forget about it, but it stayed and built up. I only felt bothered when he went on a trip.
No.
So when Chloe brought up the idea of a girls' night out again, I finally gave in. Why not? I thought. Matt wasn't around, and I felt like I needed to escape the bubble of responsibilities and rules that our marriage had turned into. Chloe and the others were thrilled. They said it was about time I let loose, and maybe they were right. The day Matt left, I got to say bye to him in passing a simple pat on the back and a see you later that neither of us really meant. I became aware that he wanted to speak out more. There was this tone of uncertainty that he used the other day when he told me to look after myself whenever he is out. He even proposed that we should find a time and sit down seriously to talk about all these when he returned. I sighed and affirmed to him that I would be fine, and honestly, I was gradually hoping for the brightness of the night to come. When I arrived at the club with Chloe and the others, the music was loud, the lights were dim, and the energy in the room was intoxicating. It had been so long since I'd been in a space like that with no plans, no expectations, just freedom to let go. I laughed harder than I had in months, sipping on cocktails and catching up with friends who made me feel like the carefree version of myself again. Chloe pulled me to the dance floor and said words to the effect that we should live at MVC University again. Initially, I was reluctant, but the rhythm of the music and my friends laughing brought me in. At least I didn't hear Matt's disapproving looks or constant nagging to avoid spending too much money for a few hours. It had gone for some time. I had almost forgotten the angry looks and words that had characterized our relationship. And then it happened. A man approached our group, a stranger, charming and confident, with an easy smile that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. He introduced himself as Jason, and before I knew it, he was pulling me into a conversation. At first it was harmless. We talked about the music, the drinks, even the chaos of the crowd. But as the night went on, I found myself drawn to him in a way I couldn't explain. Chloe saw and elbowed me, saying softly, "He is so cute! Go have some fun!" I took it lightly, though her words created a spark in me and made me curious. Was it possible to be wrong in accepting some friendly gestures occasionally? Well, Matt wasn't even here, and it wasn't like I was doing something real sinfully horrible. Or at least that's what I have tried to convince myself. As the night wore on, Jason asked me to dance. I hesitated for a moment, but before I could overthink it, I said yes. His hand on my waist felt electric, and for a brief moment I let myself forget everything else. The music, the lights, the crowd, it all faded into the background. And then he unexpectedly turned and nuzzled into me. It was not a cinematic, dramatic moment, but it was enough for my heart to start racing. I didn't pull away. I didn't stop him. It was short. I would even say it was shy, but most importantly, it was a step that I didn't want to take. Immediately, guilt began to creep in. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that it was just a moment of weakness brought on by the atmosphere of the night. I pulled away, laughing awkwardly and making some excuse to head back to my friends. Jason didn't push, but the look in his eyes lingered, a mix of understanding and something else I didn't want to name. As the night came to an end, I sat in Chloe's car, staring out the window and replaying everything in my mind. I didn't tell her about the kiss. I didn't tell anyone. Instead, I shoved the guilt deep down and told myself it was nothing, a one-time mistake that didn't matter. But as I walked into my quiet house later that night, the reality of what I'd done began to sink in. Matt's side of the bed was empty, his absence a stark reminder of the promises we had made to each other. For the first time in a long while, I felt a pang of regret that I couldn't shake. Little did I know that night would be the beginning of the end. I woke up the morning after that night out with a bunch of feelings that I couldn't quite put my finger on. One part of me felt as if I had been reborn, or rather discovered something that I felt was missing in me for quite a long time. On the other side, a feeling of guilt persisted, despite all efforts to try and suppress it. Over and over again, I kept reminding myself that there was nothing between me and Jason, that it was just a momentary slip I decided to indulge in, so I'd have something to distract me. But as much as I loved saying that to myself, I realized that there was more to it. I went about my day trying to act normal, but I felt different, like I was carrying a secret I couldn't share with anyone. When Matt got home a couple of days later, I thought I had done a good job of putting it behind me. I greeted him like I always did, pretending everything was fine. But as soon as he stepped through the door, I could see something in his eyes. He looked at me like he was searching for something, some kind of reassurance that I couldn't give. "Hi, honey. How was your weekend?" he questioned as he put his bag in the hall. His words were plain, but I could see the curiosity in him. "Uneventful," I lied, brushing it off. "Just stayed in, caught up on some shows." I turned away quickly, afraid he'd see through me if I held his gaze for too long. Matt didn't push, but I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. Over the next few days, he tried harder than usual to connect with me. He suggested we go out for dinner, asked about my day, and even offered to watch one of my favorite shows with me, a gesture he rarely made. But instead of feeling grateful, I found myself pulling away. Every kind word or thoughtful action felt like a reminder of how much I had betrayed him, and I didn't know how to handle it. I started spending more time on my phone, scrolling mindlessly or texting Chloe to avoid talking to Matt. Occasionally, I'd think about Jason. I even started texting him, though I told myself it was harmless. "Just checking in," I'd say, pretending I was keeping it casual. But those conversations quickly became something I looked forward to as a distraction from the growing tension at home. Matt noticed, of course. He wasn't the kind of man to snoop or invade my privacy, but he wasn't blind. He saw how often I had my phone in my hand, how I'd laugh at a text and then immediately tuck it away when he walked into the room. "Who are you always texting?" he asked one evening, his tone light but curious. "Just Chloe," I replied without hesitation. It wasn't entirely a lie. Sometimes it was Chloe. Other times it wasn't. Matt didn't say anything more, but I could feel the weight of his doubt hanging in the air. As the days went on, he started asking more questions, not in an accusing way, but in a way that made me feel cornered. He'd casually ask about my day, but his eyes would linger a little too long, like he was trying to figure out what I wasn't saying. "Are you okay?" he asked one night as we were getting ready for bed. "Of course," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "Why wouldn't I be?" "You just seem distant lately," he said, his voice soft but full of concern. "If something's bothering you, you can tell me." I felt a lump in my throat but swallowed it down. "I'm fine, Matt. Really, you're overthinking things." But I wasn't fine, and he wasn't overthinking. The truth was, I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling. Part of me felt guilty for what had happened with Jason, but another part of me was angry at Matt for making me feel like I had to escape in the first place. I started rationalizing the kiss, telling myself it wouldn't have happened if Matt had been more understanding, more supportive, more fun. The distance between us grew, and with it, Matt's unease. He started noticing how I'd avoid his touch or give short answers when he tried to start a conversation. One evening, as we sat in the living room, he finally brought it up. "Amanda," he said, turning to face me, "I feel like you're hiding something from me. What's going on?" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Nothing's going on," I said quickly, too quickly. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression a mix of frustration and sadness. "I don't want to fight with you," he said finally, "but something's changed, and I can't figure out what it is. You're not you anymore." I felt my defenses rising, anger bubbling up to cover my guilt. "Maybe you're imagining things," I snapped. "Not everything has to be a problem, Matt." He didn't argue, but his silence was louder than any words could have been. I could see the hurt in his eyes, but instead of feeling sorry, I felt cornered. I was angry at him for noticing, angry at myself for giving him a reason to notice, and angry at the situation we had somehow found ourselves in. That night, we went to bed without saying another word. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and wondering how things had gotten so complicated. The man I once adored now felt like a stranger, and I couldn't tell if it was his fault or mine. In my mind, I kept telling myself that everything would blow over, that this was just a phase. But deep down, I knew the cracks in our relationship were growing wider with every passing day. And the worst part? I didn't know how to stop it. The breaking point came when Matt found the texts. I didn't know how he discovered them, and to this day, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe I was careless and left my phone unlocked. Maybe he caught a glimpse of a message notification while I wasn't looking. Whatever it was, it didn't take much for him to piece everything together. It was a quiet Saturday morning when it happened. I was in the kitchen making coffee, lost in my thoughts, while Matt sat silently at the dining table. There was something different about him that day, an unusual stillness, like he was bracing himself for something. I didn't notice it at first, but when I turned to ask him a question, I saw that he was staring at his phone, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. "Is there something you want to tell me, Amanda?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. I froze, my heart pounding. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual, but my voice betrayed me with a slight tremor. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he held up his phone, the screen facing me. My stomach dropped when I saw the text to Jason. The flirty messages, the late-night conversations, all of it was laid out in plain sight. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced as I tried to think of an excuse, a way to explain it all away, but nothing came. The weight of what I'd done hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. "Matt, I can explain," I started, but he cut me off. "Don't," he said, his voice steady but laced with disappointment. "I've already seen enough." The silence that followed was suffocating. I felt like I was drowning, desperate to say something that would fix everything, but no words could undo the damage. "Is it just texts?" he asked after a moment, his eyes never leaving mine. I wanted to lie, to tell him it was nothing more than harmless flirting, but I couldn't. The truth was written all over my face. I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. He let out a slow breath, his shoulders sagging slightly, as if the weight of it all was finally hitting him. "I thought so," he said quietly. I expected him to yell, to demand answers, to accuse me of betraying him, but he didn't. Instead, he stood up, his movements deliberate and calm, and walked over to the window. For a long time, he just stood there, staring out at the street like he was trying to gather his thoughts. When he finally turned back to me, his expression was unreadable. "I've been trying to make this work, Amanda," he said, his voice steady but cold. "I've given you everything I have, and this is how you repay me?" "Matt, please, I didn't mean for any of this to happen," I said, tears streaming down my face. "It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything." He shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "A mistake?" he repeated. "You don't accidentally send flirty texts. You don't accidentally betray the person who's been by your side through everything." I tried to reach for him, but he stepped back, putting distance between us. "It's over, Amanda," he said, his tone final. "I'm done." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean, over?" You can't just walk away from everything we've built together, I cried, desperation creeping into my voice. He looked at me, his expression hard. Everything we've built, he said, shaking his head. You've been tearing it down for months, and I've been too blind to see it. But not anymore. I begged him to reconsider, to give me a chance to make things right, but he wasn't listening. He had made up his mind, and nothing I said could change that. I've already taken care of everything, he said, his voice calm but firm. The house, the accounts, it's all in my name. You won't have to worry about anything because there won't be anything left to worry about. I stared at him in disbelief. You can't do this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I already have, he replied, his tone cold and detached. The full weight of his words sank in as he walked away, leaving me standing there in the kitchen, completely shattered. I followed him, begging him to stay, but he didn't even look back. He packed a bag, grabbed his keys, and walked out the door without another word. For the next few hours, I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. When I finally got up and checked our bank accounts, the reality of the situation hit me like a punch to the gut. He had drained everything. Every penny we had saved was gone. The house, which I had always thought of as ours, was in his name. He had planned it all so meticulously, leaving me with nothing but the clothes on my back and the overwhelming weight of my guilt. I tried calling him, but he didn't answer. I sent text after text, begging him to come back, to talk to me, to let me explain. But it was no use. He was gone, and there was nothing I could do to change that. As the hours turned into days, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I had lost everything, my husband, my home, my financial security, all because of one reckless decision. I never thought Matt would actually leave. I had always assumed that no matter what, he would forgive me, that he loved me enough to work through anything. But I was wrong. Looking back, I realized how much I had taken him for granted. He had given me stability, love, and a future, and I had thrown it all away for a fleeting moment of attention. Now, I was left with nothing but the crushing weight of my regret and the knowledge that I had no one to blame but myself. Matt's silence was the loudest revenge he could have taken. He didn't need to yell or argue or try to hurt me. He simply walked away, taking everything we had built together and leaving me with the ruins of my own choices. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could convince him to come back, to forgive me, to give us another chance. But as the days passed, it became clear that Matt was gone for good. Update. The days after Matt left felt like a waking nightmare. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that he just needed time to cool off, and that eventually he'd come back. But as each day passed without a word from him, the reality of what I had done began to settle in. I had destroyed everything in a stable, loving marriage for what? A fleeting thrill, a moment of attention from a stranger who now didn't even matter. Jason, the man I had flirted with and kissed that night, didn't take long to disappear from my life. After Matt confronted me, I reached out to Jason in desperation, hoping for some kind of comfort or validation. But my messages went unanswered. He ghosted me completely, leaving me feeling humiliated and used. The man who had seemed so charming and attentive that night was now just another reminder of my mistakes, a mistake that cost me everything. The loneliness that followed was suffocating. I stayed in bed for hours each day, barely able to muster the energy to get up. The house, once filled with the warmth of our life together, now felt empty and cold. Everywhere I looked, I was reminded of Matt, his favorite coffee mug still in the cupboard, his side of the closet now bare, the small touches he had added to make the house feel like home. It was unbearable. I tried to reach out to my friends, but their responses were lukewarm at best. Chloe, the one who had encouraged me to let loose on that night out, was the first to pull away. "I'm so sorry, Amanda," she said when I called her, tears choking my voice. "I didn't think things would get this bad. I don't know what to say." Her discomfort was obvious, and after that call, she stopped answering altogether. Other friends weren't as kind. Word of what happened spread quickly, and before I knew it, I became the subject of whispered gossip and judgmental looks. How could she throw away such a good man? I heard one of them say at a gathering I wasn't invited to, but found out about later. The shame was overwhelming. People I had once considered close friends now avoided me, and I didn't blame them. Even my family was distant. My mother, who had always adored Matt, was heartbroken when I told her the truth. "Amanda," she said, shaking her head, "I raised you better than this. How could you do this to him? To yourself?" Her disappointment cut deeper than I expected, and her words echoed in my mind long after the conversation ended. I tried to reach out to Matt, desperate to fix what I had broken. I called, texted, even showed up at his office once, but he wouldn't see me. The few times I managed to get a response, it was short and to the point. There's nothing to talk about. He had made up his mind, and nothing I said would change it. A few weeks later, I saw him for the first time since he left. It was at a coffee shop we used to visit together. I had gone there out of habit, hoping the familiarity would bring me some comfort, but instead, it brought me face to face with him and her. She was beautiful, poised, and everything I wasn't. They were laughing, their body language easy and relaxed. It was like seeing the life I had lost play out in front of me, only now someone else was in my place. I wanted to run, to hide, but I couldn't move. He saw me before I could slip away, and for a brief moment our eyes met. There was no anger in his expression, no bitterness, just indifference. He gave me a polite nod, as if I were a stranger, and turned back to her. The pain of that moment was unbearable. He had moved on, and he was happier without me. The worst part wasn't that he was dating someone else. It was the realization that he didn't need me anymore. The man I had taken for granted, the man I had assumed would always forgive me, had rebuilt his life without me in it. And as much as it hurt to admit, he was thriving. Meanwhile, my life was falling apart. Depression consumed me, leaving me unable to focus on work or take care of myself. I stopped going out altogether, afraid of running into someone who knew what had happened. My world, once filled with love and stability, had shrunk to the four walls of the empty house Matt had left behind. The nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake for hours, replaying every moment that led to this point, wondering how I could have been so blind. I thought about the small things Matt used to do, the way he'd bring me coffee in the morning, or how he'd quietly fix something around the house without saying a word. I missed the way he used to look at me, like I was his whole world, and now I was nothing to him. I knew I had no one to blame but myself. Matt wasn't perfect, but he had loved me unconditionally, and I had thrown that love away. I had been selfish, reckless, and blind to what I had until it was gone. Now, all I had left was regret and the hollow realization that I would never get him back. Friends, family, even acquaintances, they all moved on, leaving me to deal with the mess I had created. And Jason? He was just a fleeting moment in a long list of regrets, someone who had disappeared as quickly as he had appeared. The loneliness was crushing, but the worst part was knowing that I had done this to myself. I had taken the life Matt and I had built together and shattered it, and now I was left to pick up the pieces alone. The hardest thing to accept is that this pain, the regret, the loneliness, the overwhelming sense of loss is entirely my own doing. I thought I was searching for myself, but in the process, I lost the one person who truly loved me, and now all I can do is live with the empty space he left behind.